Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Driving Digital Stand Up. And here we have today Jason James, good friend of mine. I've known him for years on Twitter. We've met several times at conferences, and he's got a really interesting background to tell us about his time in healthcare, his interest in security, but most importantly, he is the empathetic digital trailblazing CAO. Hello, JJ.
Hey, Isaac, it's great to be with you today.
So we're heading into a period of uncertainty going into 2023. We don't know what next year is going to look like. But I'm interested. You have a background that's moved around from a couple different areas. Your most recent jobs has been a CIO in healthcare. Tell me a little bit about what it's like to be a CIO in healthcare.
I reluctantly went into it. If you
Mm.
look at my background, I've done everything from professional services to telecom to pure software. And when the private equity company first approached me, they said, "Look, we've got this role in healthcare tech." And I said, "I'm not interested." And they said, "Well, why is that?" I said, "Well, healthcare is where innovation goes to die, and I haven't built my career on that." And they said, "That's exactly why we want to speak with you." And so, I spent 6 years in healthcare tech. It was so interesting coming from the outside, right? Working with such, blue chip companies as Dell and Cisco and Walmart and Amazon, and coming into healthcare and realizing not the companies I was working for, but the companies I was supporting, of how far behind they were. I remember being in my first week and I said, "Wow, here's how you sum up healthcare. It's yesterday's technology tomorrow." And it was just shocking, right? It was shocking to see it from a security standpoint. It was shocking to see it from a enterprise solution standpoint. We were fortunate, the two organizations I was working with, we were in some cases 10 years ahead of where the industry was. And so it's getting there. There were some awful things that came out of COVID. I think one of the positive things that happened to healthcare, it forced digital transformation of a decade worth of change to happen within a 2 year period. And that was great to see. There's still a long way to go. I think what you're seeing as a result of this consumerization of healthcare tech, and that's everything from, behavioral health on your phone to telemedicine. I think it's going to drive the future of technology. And you're starting to see it. You're starting to see leaders being brought in from the enterprise space, moving into healthcare. And so I'm excited about what the future holds. But there's still a lot of challenges.
JJ, you mentioned three things that really interest me about healthcare. Maybe deep dive for a few seconds on a few of them. Mobile and bring my data to my doctor. Telehealth, which I think has gone from like nascent to front and center for the medical area. What's that look like from the inside? And then security. I know that's dear to your heart. So maybe
Yeah.
go. What does a world look like at a mainstream to leading edge hospital today in those areas?
Yeah, I think what you're seeing right now in really mainstream hospitals is really a consolidation driven by private equity. If you think about the hospitals that were prepared for pandemic, and to be honest, nobody was, those that were able to survive it financially were put in a position where, with the backings of private equity and other firms, able to gobble up more of those hospitals. What the sad aspect of it is, if you look at rural hospitals, a lot of them are hanging on or have closed. And so that really, for those living in rural parts of America, that has put them at a disadvantage. And so that part of it's become scary. The bigger players have gotten bigger. They're going to continue to get bigger. Those in underserved areas will continue to struggle, and as a result, it will impact those players those patients in those areas. So that's the first part of that.
Mhm.
I think what you're going to see is that with any healthcare setting, because it's become impacted by a global pandemic, what you're seeing is how patients get care, when they got care. Unfortunately, for 2+ years, many Americans, not just Americans, but people around the world, postponed checkups. They postponed, going in and getting cancer screenings and heart screenings. I think what we're seeing in healthcare coming out of this year is the same thing we're seeing in the enterprise space, is that stuff was put off and people are trying to play catch up now. While people are trying to play catch up with their health, organizations are trying to play catch up on their security, right? They deployed so many new technologies that they weren't quite ready for that came to the market. And now they're sort of clawing that back and trying to standardize and actually secure those environments.
JJ, I'm saying the same thing. I did some workshops this year with a major hospital system, and going from how do we upgrade our EMR on a more regular basis
Right.
to how do we do acquisitions because they're doing a lot of them. How do we do them more regularly, more easily, have a playbook around it. To now they're thinking about, patient experience, right? How do we use telehealth to handle the rural areas, but also, how we differentiate so when people come to visit one of our doctors, the doctor knows a little bit more about them, has a little bit more information. They trust the doctor with sharing information with them. That plays into the whole security side of things. I imagine a lot of this, JJ, is also stressful, right? As a CIO in healthcare. Tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, you can imagine. I mean, if you think about, and I'm going to take myself out of it. I've said stress is what's kept me together over the years, right? It's sort of like the duct tape. But I'm gonna talk about other CIOs, especially in the healthcare industry, and what they were facing. If you take a traditional setting, right? they Many of them in the healthcare setting were ill prepared. I remember talking to people at the time, and they still had desktop computers, right? And they were
Mhm.
still serving, and all of a sudden they had an IT workforce that wasn't coming to the office, and so they were scrambling to get laptops. You can imagine, that would be stressful in itself, just dealing with the pandemic. But then we were dealing with a global supply chain issue
Mhm.
that it was almost like this perfect storm, right? And so that made it even more stressful. And then you had members of your team with that either got sick or had family members die due to the pandemic, add more stress, right? And so it's collectively, I think a lot of CIOs, not just in the healthcare industry, but perhaps in other industries, are experiencing this form of PTSD that's always on, this movement at an alarming rate. The great thing about remote work, it enabled us to keep moving forward. What we found across multiple industries, there's people were moving into the red zone because they were working all the time. It's not that they were, working from home,
Mhm.
it's that they were living at work. And, that added to stress. I think what we're seeing as a result of all this, if you look at healthcare and healthcare tech, is this growth of behavioral health, right? We
Mhm.
talked about this convergence of telemedicine. Well, this uh, a virtual therapist, right? If you look at Generation Z and millennials, and a lot more comfortable picking up, a smartphone and interacting with a therapist. But I think what you're finding, just based on the data I'm seeing, more and more demographics are approaching that because, they need a break. They need someone to talk to. They need to say, hey, look, this has been a very stressful time, both professionally and personally. And so I feel like a lot of people are dealing with that, and the healthcare and healthcare tech industry is evolving to sort of meet that need in a more comfortable setting. We're much more comfortable getting treatment at home than, you know, getting in traffic, driving across town and meeting with someone face to face.
JJ, you and I are both one of several CIOs talking about the stress that is happening in IT, and for IT leaders, for CIOs. I've been talking about particularly in security and what it's like to be responding to issues all the time and having the business knocking on your door and saying, when is this going to be back
Right.
up and running?
Right.
When you're still trying to figure out what the issue is. My stress relief valve, I talk about it in Digital Trailblazer. When things got to me, I just went and took a walk. I mean, I just had to
Yeah.
get away from it and clear my mind and say, look, there's a world out there I can breathe, and I'll get back in the office and figure things out after that. So that was one of the things I did. JJ, I'm calling you the empathetic CIO, and part of it is you're attuned to the mental health issues that we're also facing. But also, I've seen you talk about key areas of around leadership, around diversity, around mentoring people, kids mostly,
Mhm.
people who are aspiring transformation leaders. Where did that bug come from for you? Where did it start?
Yeah, I think one of it came from I remember early on in my career wanting to get time with CIOs, and there were so many roadblocks. It was like you couldn't get past their assistant. I remember working for CIOs, and um, you just couldn't get time with them, and I found that to be really disappointing. And I remember thinking the first time I take the mantle of CIO, I'm going to change that. And so when I was first appointed CIO, I introduced this program, and I've written about it, and I labeled it Mentorship Monday.
Mm,
And every Monday out of my schedule, I dedicated several hours to mentoring anyone on my team that wanted it. Number one, they had to ask for it. I believe mentorship should be, this thing you ask for. I've worked for large organizations where they had assigned a mentor, and that was horrible. I was like, you want somebody that you can learn from, someone you respect, someone that you hope inspires you to change your career. And so for
mm,
me, when I created that, I wanted number one, they had to ask for it. Number two, it didn't go to HR. Number three, it didn't go to their boss. It stayed between me and them. What I found was it took players that were C players and made them A players, right? Because somebody was focused on growing their career, helping them, even answering basic questions. And what did it mean to work in an organization? How did you interact with another executive? How do you deal with conflict resolution? And so I continue that to my next CIO role. And I found again that it enabled players to be very engaged. But what was also born out of it were early, at my last organization, these early employee resource groups,
mm.
which was great. Everything from women in technology to the Black experience, those came from people that were in my mentoring program. Eventually is so successful. Number one, it kept people engaged. If you think about digital transformation, this doesn't happen overnight. You're talking 18 to 36 months on a lot of major projects. And so you want your players engaged and you want them continuing. If not, the project will run over budget or, run over cost. It'll run over time. It's woefully impactful. And so keeping the right people in the boat long enough helps you. And so it was so successful in doing that. I had the lowest attrition of any major department at a time when salaries in IT were at an all-time high. And I was also asked by other departments, could I mentor some of their players? And so I chose to do that. I brought that same mentality to a nonprofit that both of us support, which is CIO Chat,
Mhm.
and run that mentoring program. Last year, it chose two students out of Albany State, and we paired them with four CIOs, well-known CIOs in the industry, for a year to help them grow their career. And I'm very proud of that work. I think to reuse that phrase, if you make it at the top, it's your obligation to send the elevator back down. And I truly believe that. And in a way, when you think about it, it's this form of disaster recovery within your own organization, right? If you think about one of the problems we face in America, we've got a grain of the executive suite. Well, if you're not building that next generation, there's a form of disaster
JJ,
happening.
I think you're
Yeah,
building this generation. I mean, I forget about next generation. I mean,
yeah.
talk about being innovative and trying to drive more impact with more technology across your organization. You need more leaders, and they're hungry for it.
Yeah, and they're out there, right? Everybody talks about this shortage of leadership. Well, it's a shortage of leadership because we haven't tried to help create it, right? We haven't
Mhm.
created the opportunities, we haven't created the mentoring. And I think it's important. But if you think about it, and again, I'm going to go back to that idea of disaster recovery. If something happens, who's going to take that next seat, right? And so we need to be preparing for that. And I think many organizations are way behind in doing that. And so, I encourage people to do that. I encourage also from a form of diversity, right?
Mhm.
We often talk about diversity as being gender and race, but it's also there's an important to look at diversity from different verticals. One of the things I did when I hired is I had a bias in hiring in healthcare tech to not hire from healthcare, right?
Mhm.
If I wanted to change the industry, I would bring people from outside the industry, whether they be men or women or people of color. But this idea of having diversity creates diversity of thought, and it really makes us multifaceted to be able to see a problem from every angle. And I think that's incredibly important. And so organizations I've ran that when we've done that, we've been much more successful.
JJ, incredible story here. You are the empathetic CIO. I'm always turning towards you for your thoughts around this. How to, really groom the next set of leaders who are going to drive innovation in organizations. What do you want to share with the group? You're doing a lot of different things in the security space.
Yeah.
Talked about what you're doing with mentoring. What do you want to share with the group before we sign off?
We talked about mental health, and I want to encourage people to make sure they're taking time for themselves, because we did talk about the stresses, and right now I'm helping advise different PE and venture backed companies, especially in the cybersecurity space, because we talked about that briefly. Man, is that stressful, right? Not what I'm doing, but what they're doing, right?
Mhm.
Never before has it been so hard to be a CIO or a CISO. You talk about nation state attacks, supply chain issues, and ransomware, and insider threat. It's all so complicated, right?
What's going to wake you up tonight and tomorrow night and the next 3 weeks, right?
Yeah, it'll be that, right? You have to prepare for not if it happens, but when it happens, and how to recover from that. There's a very it's been all over the news lately, a very large MSP out of Texas. They're approaching day 15, 16 of a ransomware attack hitting hosted email servers of their clients, and they're still down. My empathy and sympathy goes out to those teams that are working on that and those clients impacted. But I encourage everybody. The holiday seasons are always a really high time for stress. Sadly, it's a very common time for suicide, and I want people to make sure they take a moment to realize, as terrible as all this stuff seems to be at times, there is light at the end of the tunnel. You do have people you can turn to. Those that have friends and family, lean on them. I often say there's no shame in therapy, right? We want people to get help. Never before has it been so easy. There's plenty of apps you can pick up and reach out and get help from someone. And, those that have a strong network of friends and family, you are blessed. So I encourage people to keep doing that.
JJ, I can't think of a better ending to this episode of the Driving Digital Stand Up and to my episodes in 2022, talking to the empathetic CIO, Jason James, JJ, who's been a CIO in multiple careers. And now I think we're both looking forward to the holiday season.
Absolutely. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays. And thank you, everyone, for a great year. And I look forward to seeing you on the Driving Digital Stand Up in 2023.